As the minister and I discussed today, the security situation around Japan and in the region remains, as he said, and we agree, severe. The threats we face are real and they are urgent. China's unprecedented military buildup and its aggressive military actions speak for themselves. Make no mistake about it, our alliance is critical to deterring Chinese military aggression, shoulder to shoulder with Japan.
我们正告日方必须深刻反省历史罪责，立即停止干涉中国内政、挑衅越线的错误言行，不要在台湾问题上玩火，玩火者必自焚。
主権国家なわけないじゃないですか。植民地なんですよ。残念ながら今の日本は植民地、私はそう考えています。大臣はこの国は植民地だと思われますか?
The fallout continues between Japan and China after the new Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi's comments last Friday that a Chinese military operation in Taiwan could create a survival-threatening situation for Japan. In response, China's Consul General in Osaka commented on the Prime Minister's remarks by posting on social media, "The dirty head that sticks itself in must be cut off." He later deleted that statement, but the damage was done. Tokyo condemned it, and the US ambassador to Japan publicly blasted the remark, accusing Beijing of threatening both the Japanese Prime Minister and the Japanese people, and warning China to start behaving like the good neighbor it always claims to be. And the blowback continues. China has now advised its citizens to avoid traveling to Japan and warned Tokyo that if it dares intervene militarily in a Taiwan conflict, the result would be, in Beijing's words, a crushing defeat for the country. Takaichi, for her part, says that her remarks were purely hypothetical. Tokyo insists it was simply a legal interpretation under Japan's 2015 security law that a survival-threatening situation refers to an armed attack on an ally, usually taken to mean the United States, and that poses an existential threat to Japan. In such a case, the self-defense forces can participate in collective defense. But to China, this wasn't a legal nuance. It was a direct signal that Japan is shifting from a defensive posture into a forward-leaning interventionist actor in the Taiwan Strait, the region that China sees as being most sensitive core interest. China's foreign ministry posted a warning on X in both Japanese and English, saying that Japan must stop playing with fire, because any attempt to meddle in the cross-strait situation would be treated as an act of aggression. And Beijing has accused the Prime Minister of violating the 1972 Japan-China joint communique, where Japan understood and respected China's position that Taiwan is part of China. Chinese state media has accused Tokyo of crossing red lines. Now, what makes this more explosive is that just days earlier, Takaichi met Lin, a former senior Taiwanese leader, on the sidelines of the APEC summit in South Korea, and referred to him as a senior advisor to the presidential office of Taiwan. In the comments, she said that she hoped that the practical cooperation between Japan and Taiwan will deepen. Beijing called this egregious and lodged a diplomatic protest. So now China and Japan are once again locked in a diplomatic clash. It may look like a small episode on the surface, but beneath it basically lies a century of mistrust, trauma, and strategic competition between the two countries, and deep fears in Beijing that Japan's new prime minister intends to take a more hawkish, ideological, and a less filtered approach to foreign policy. This is the second major incident in the short time since Takaichi took office less than a month ago. And it underscores exactly what Chinese strategists feared after her election, that she's a deeply conservative, nationalist figure who has long been critical of China and very pro-US, and will be willing to push Japanese foreign policy in a much more assertive direction. Takaichi has made regular visits to the Yasukuni Shrine. It's a site that China and South Korea see as a symbol of Japan's wartime aggression. That shrine has 14 Class A war criminals, including those held responsible for the 1937 Nanjing massacre. Now, on that massacre, estimates vary widely, but between 100,000 and 300,000 Chinese civilians are thought to have been killed, and over 20,000 women raped. A Japanese prime minister visiting that shrine is not seen as a neutral act. It's interpreted as honoring that past, signaling a revival of the nationalist narrative that the region remembers all too well. In her first major policy speech on Friday last week in front of the Japanese parliament, the same speech where she made her Taiwan remarks, Takaichi pledged to accelerate Japan's military buildup, pushing defense spending beyond 2% of GDP a full year ahead of schedule. She wants to upgrade Japan's national security strategy early as well. She has previously floated revising Japan's pacifist constitution, suggesting that a quasi-security alliance be created with Taiwan, and called for strengthening Japan's ties with the US and regional partners. Now, to Beijing, this means one thing. Japan is preparing to play an even bigger role in the Quad, which China already sees as a bloc built to counter it. She's seen as someone who shares the US strategic goals and a leader ready to operationalize and push that Japan-US alliance in that China scenario much more so than earlier Japanese leaders. Now, Takaichi also has a long association with pro-Taiwanese political groups. She sees Taiwan not just as a strategic issue, but an ideological one as well. And for Beijing, this is a red flag, because combined with her relative lack of crisis management experience, Chinese analysts fear that she may escalate rather than de-escalate a situation during a tense moment in, for example, the East China Sea or the Taiwan Straits. Now, so far, she's refused to retract her statement and defended it as being consistent with the government's traditional position. And in narrow legal terms, she's correct. But what made this moment unprecedented is that she broke Japan's long-standing diplomatic practice of avoiding any explicit connection between Taiwan and Japan's survival-threatening legal threshold. Like the United States, Japan has always relied on a strategic ambiguity about what it will do. Takaichi broke that ambiguity. She has said that she would be careful about commenting on specific scenarios from now on. However, for Beijing, this is not a slip. It's a preview of her governing style. Takaichi is much more direct, more ideological, and more comfortable saying things out aloud that Japanese leaders usually keep quite vague. This is exactly why China reacted so strongly to the Taiwan remarks. It suggests that Tokyo is preparing mentally, legally, and politically for a Taiwan conflict alongside the US, and China wants to warn it before that. Now, a Japanese leader talking about Taiwan is especially sensitive for China. Japan annexed Taiwan in 1895 after the First Sino-Japanese War, and it was the beginning of a long period of Japanese expansion across East Asia. Taiwan became Japan's first overseas colony, and they ruled it for over 50 years. So for Beijing, this remains a symbol of that era when a rising Japan humiliated and dismembered the Qing state. For China, Japanese involvement in Taiwan today, even in a rhetoric state, touches a nerve. It's that fear about foreign powers could once again use Taiwan to contain or constrain China's rise. And that is why China's reaction to Takaichi's comments was so intense. So, for example, when a Japanese leader talks about collective defense and Taiwan contingencies, it resonates very differently in Beijing than it does in Tokyo. To understand why China reacted so sharply, you also have to understand the historical memory that hangs over this relationship. China and Japan are neighbors, bound by economics. They're top trading partners with each other. China is Japan's #1 partner, and Japan is China's #3 partner. But they're divided by some of the most painful events of the 20th century. The occupation of Manchuria in 1931, the establishment of the puppet state of Manchukuo, the full-scale invasion of China in 1937, and the Nanjing massacre. These are not abstract historical events inside China. Japan's invasion and occupation of China between 1931 and 1945 left an estimated 15 to 20 million Chinese dead. They are taught about this in schools, this is remembered in films, and is deeply embedded in their national consciousness. August the 15th, the day Japan surrendered, is celebrated across East Asia as the Day of Liberation. In Korea, they have a special word for it, which means the day the light returned. For Japan, these events belong to a distant history. They've erased all their sins, they've paid for them, and they've cleaned them under the almost 7 years of American occupation, which lasted until 1952. An occupation that wrote the country's constitution and its identity. American bases still remain on Japanese soil today. For China, those events remain a living warning, never again to allow a foreign power to dominate the region at China's own expense. And this is where Article 9 comes in. Japan's pacifist constitution, written under the US occupation, renounced war and forbade Japan from maintaining a war potential. For China, this Article 9 has always been a psychological safety barrier, a guarantee that Japan would never again become a military threat. But today that barrier looks weaker than ever. Japan is expanding its defense budget to historic highs. It's acquiring long-range strike missiles for the first time since World War II. It's rewriting its defense guidelines, and it's strengthening security ties with the US, Australia, South Korea, and even NATO. And all of this has US approval. In fact, it has been pushing Japan for over a decade now to spend much more militarily. Because Washington sees Japan as the central pin to its strategy to contain China, Japan's new Prime Minister is accelerating exactly the trend that Washington wants and Beijing fears. So when Japan talks about Taiwan, China doesn't hear hypothetical legal theory. It hears history, remilitarization, and using Taiwan as that first step in its expansion into China. And that is the core of this diplomatic clash. Japan's remarks are signals that that old post-World War II equilibrium is breaking, that Japan may be preparing to take a more assertive role in the region, and that Taiwan is no longer a distant or hypothetical issue, but a direct point of friction between Asia's two largest powers. Economic interdependence can delay tensions, but it won't erase that historical memory of strategic mistrust. I'm Najma Minhas with GVS Deep Dive. Do share with me your thoughts. Have a great day.